Hello and welcome to the whiteboard briefings presented by me, Ian Clark. The briefing today is going to be on, in this session, is going to be the reversing into a bay. Now there are 4 manoeuvres you do need to learn for the UK driving test. This is one of them, reversing into a bay. Another one is pulling in forwards. And the other 2 you may or may not know, but the other 2, there's one which is parallel park, which is pulling alongside a car and reversing in. There's another one which is pulling up on the other side of the road, stopping and reversing back in a straight line. You will only do one of those manoeuvres. So let's come to the bay park. The bay park, if you reverse into a bay, it will, as far as I know, it's only ever done at the driving test centre if they have that facility, because I do know that there are some test centres that don't actually have the option for whatever reason. There's not the layout, there's not the space to do reversing into a bay. The test centre I use, it's an option because the layout is very similar to this. So we'll go through it anyway. The bay park can be done at the end of the test, or it can be done right at the beginning. You'll be facing this way. The examiner could ask you to pull out, but I'll cover that in a moment. The 3 component parts to the manoeuvres, the reversing, what I mean by that, what you'll be assessed on, the things that make up a successful manoeuvre, the three component parts, and in no particular order, just because I'm saying this one first or whatever, doesn't mean it's the most important, but let's just say observation. Looking around, cover that in great detail in a moment. Accuracy, getting into the bay, and control, which is basically your clutch and your brake. And I do kind of say that quite often with the control, clutch and brake, you notice I haven't said accelerator or gas, because on a lot of modern vehicles you don't actually need an accelerator. You can manoeuvre the vehicle quite happily on tick over. That's just when the engine is idling or just running without any acceleration whatsoever. So they're the 3 component parts, and I'll go through those in a moment. So if you've been out on your drive, your test, and you're coming back, so that it's this, the reverse into the bay is only done at the test centre, and you're coming back and you haven't done a manoeuvre, you'll be getting the parking bay, reversing into a bay at the end. So you've done no manoeuvre, you're coming back, so you know what's waiting for you. So here we are. Now, the car park could have other people coming back off test, so there could be quite a few vehicles there, or if you, in some ways you're quite lucky, I guess, it's quite empty. But just for argument's sake, say it's empty, but there could be other vehicles around. I've got my bays numbered here. They're not always numbered at the driving test centre. Certainly where I go, they're not numbered. I've just put the numbers in for convenience sake, just to help with the briefing. So here we go. You come back, and the examiner will ask you to pull up before you get to the bays, and he or she, the examiner, will say, right, I'd like you to pull forward, reverse back into a bay of your choice. Now, they don't specify the bay, and you don't have to, just an available bay or a bay of your choice. You don't have to tell the examiner. So I suppose if you chose bay 3 and you ended up in 4, then as long as you're in the bay, it's okay, as long as it's not the car in bay 3 or bay 4. So they'll ask you to pull forward, stop and reverse back, and it can be to the left or to the right. As I've said, the layout of the test centre I use is like this. There might be just bays on one side, so you have to reverse in on the right-hand side but here you've got a choice. Different instructors have different ways of teaching this. As long as you end up in the bay, because the exam will say you'd like to reverse back in the bay of your choice, you must end up in between the white lines. And if you want to correct it, you've got to do it before you get right to the end of the bay. Again, I'll come to that. So if you've gone a little bit wrong, pull forward and you can come back. Again, I'll come back to that. So the way I teach it, I get my students to be more or less in the middle of the gap. Don't get too fixed on this, because the person who's teaching you, or the way you've learnt, might be slightly different. All I can say is this is what I teach my students. So I get my students to pull up in the middle and stop. Now, if it's really, really quiet, if it is empty, say you're the first one back, the examiner might say, I want you to treat this like a busy supermarket car park. So even though it's empty, you have to imagine people pushing trolleys across, vehicles reversing out. So if you just whizzed in really quick and ended up in the bay accurately, didn't look around, then the examiner would not be impressed. It could quite easily be a major fault. So they might say, treat it like a busy supermarket car park, just to make sure you do your observations. You don't have to do it in a continuous movement. You can stop and look around. So let's just say, for argument's sake, you're going to come back into bay 4. So I have little markers. Your instructor might have the same. Little markers on my passenger side door, little white markers where my students can stop, and I say, look, you're lined up with the first, well, black line here, but white line of the bay as it is. So you'll have to be guided by your instructor trainer. But where the line crosses into the passenger door, and again, this is what I teach. I can't show you where the lines are, but there's a point at which you can see it almost extend the line mentally, and it intersects your passenger door at a certain point. Usually my students about halfway along. And I get them to stop and I say, right, that's it. So I help them get the reference point. It's not an exact science. There's a little bit, maybe they might be a little bit further this way or that way, a bit further back. But the idea is to get them into the bay. Now, in the future, in your own car, your own vehicle, whatever you're driving, van, you'll probably, through a bit of trial and error, come back and maybe make a few mistakes getting into the bay, but then you find out what works for you. But I get my students to pull in the middle, come back. There are there's different ways of teaching these, pulling forwards and coming back. As long as it works, it's okay. So I get my students to come back to a certain point. And then when they've got to that point, that reference point, because we're going in this side, I say, right, dry steer, full lock towards me. Now, dry steer means steering when the vehicle is not moving. Your instructor, or whoever, might not like you dry steering. It's not wrong, it's not a fault, but it is wear and tear on the vehicle. Now, I don't mind my students dry steering. It just makes it easier for getting in. It's like a formula. In other words, if you dry steer, then you know everything is the same rather than moving and steering. It works on both methods. It's better to be moving and steering, but there's nothing wrong with dry steering. So you stop, dry steer, full lock, turn the wheel, because we're going this side, as far as you can to the left. So that means you've got your full lock on. Now, the question is, which bay, if you stop here, is this going to take you into? Now, it will be the third bay along. 1, 2, 3. So it's going to be that bay. So not that one, not that one, that one. You need to know that. You need to know, because you want to end up in a bay that is free. So if there are other vehicles pulled up there, you wouldn't be able to use that bay. So it's the third bay along. So have a good look all around. Take your time. Do not hurry it. Take your time. So look all around. Now, I get my students to put their left-hand door mirror down, because when they're coming into the bay, they'll be able to look in this left mirror and see the white line, black line, white line in real life. Because if you don't put your mirror down, then if you look in your door mirror on the left, you won't see anything, it's too high. So have it bent down. That's if your instructor lets you do it. The examiner's fine with it, but that's if your instructor lets you do it. My car, when you go into reverse, the left-hand mirror goes down automatically because it's designed. The designers know that if you're in reverse, you're going to get a better view if your mirror's down. So put it down. It's fine if you can. I would always advise it for the help with accuracy. Accuracy is perhaps the most tricky bit. So there we are. We've got full lock. We've lined up and then back we go. Now you can see we're straight in the bay and we've still got full lock on. If you do have your door mirror down, left mirror, you'll see in your mirror, you'll be able to look and see that you're nice and straight in the bay. So stop the car. There's your reverse lights. Stop the car, that's your brake lights. Stop the car when you can see that you're straight. Stop the car and then get your steering straight. And then back you go. Now, from a test point of view, as long as your vehicle is not over the lines into the other bay, even if you're on the line and the wheel's not over, it's acceptable. Okay, for real life, you just wouldn't do it. For the UK test, it's okay if you're even just running, just touching the line. If there are other vehicles there, then, no, but that will be okay. So back you go. Now, I think as a driver, when you're learning, you should know which way to steer to correct it. What I mean by that, all well and good if you've got yourself straight in the bay, but if you're a little bit out, you need to know which way to steer to tweak it. And a lot of people get confused which way to steer. So it's well worth practicing going backwards in a straight line, looking in your door mirror over your shoulder and working out which way to steer. Some people are fine with it. Some people get a bit confused because it's backwards. So if you want to go that way, steer that way. It's actually that simple. So let's just say you've come back and you've made a little bit of a mess of it. You're a little bit out for whatever reason, a bit nervous at the end, got your reference points, a little bit higgledy-piggledy. You are allowed to pull forward and shunt, which means, oh my goodness, I'm not going to get in here. So on this, on the whiteboard here, you'll see that the bays line up, they are symmetrical, and there's nothing in that bay. You are okay to pull forwards, line up, and then come backwards. It does mean extra observation if you do that. You've got to really look around, but you are allowed to shunt. Now, as far as I know, you're allowed to shunt twice. That's from my experience. I don't know what the sort of written thing, twice. Once, twice. If it gets to 3 times, then the examiner may say, well, look, that's enough. But I think twice is probably getting towards the max. So, and then reverse back to the back. Right, that's fine. Now, at the beginning of your test, that was at the end of your test where you come in. At the beginning of your test, you will be, or you should be, if there's bays like this, walk out from the test centre to your vehicle, and then once you get in and the examiner's done their little bit of talk about the test and what's required, they could ask you at the beginning to pull out to the left or the right and reverse back into a bay of your choice. That's at the very beginning. And if you do that, that's your manoeuvre done. So it's pretty much the same. Aim to get in the middle. And if your instructor has used the reference points, he's got reference or she's got reference points, you come back, you get to your reference point, say, full lock it. If we just say it's this here, full lock, and then that'll take you into the third bay along. And we'll make it a bit straighter than that. Why not? So that's a briefing on the parking bay. Hopefully you found that quite helpful. Maybe answered a few questions that you had, and maybe answered a few questions you hadn't really thought about. But that's the briefing on the parking bay. Thanks for watching.